The Cornfield Whispers. It was one of those evenings where the world seemed to pause, as though nature itself was holding its breath. The cornfields stretched endlessly an ocean of golden stalks swaying gently under a sky painted with the colors of dusk. The air carried the faint scent of earth and drying leaves, mingling with the distant hum of crickets beginning their nightly symphony. In this quiet corner of the countryside, life moved at a slower pace, untouched by the chaos of cities and modernity. But on this particular evening, something unusual stirred within the fields, something that would leave an indelible mark on everyone who dared to listen. Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from, and what time is it there? It began with a woman named Emilia, woman who had spent her entire life surrounded by these sprawling acres of corn. She knew the land like the back of her hand, every row, every bend, every hidden corner. But even familiarity couldn't prepare her for what she would encounter that night. Emily had been out late, tending to some final chores before heading back to the farmhouse. The sun had dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the fields, and the first stars were just beginning to peek through the darkening veil above. As she walked along the edge of the property, her boots crunching softly against the dry soil, she heard Ida sound so faint at first that she thought it might be her imagination. A whisper, almost imperceptible, carried by the breeze. At first, she dismissed it, chalking it up to the rustling of leaves or the creaking of wooden fences in the distance. But then it came again louder this time, unmistakable, voices. They were coming from deep within the cornfield. Emily froze. Her heart pounded in her chest. The voices weren't loud, but they were clear enough to send a shiver down her spine. They spoke in hushed tones, overlapping one another in a chaotic jumble of words she couldn't quite make out. There was no mistaking it. They were human voices, yet they sounded strange, distorted as if filtered through layers of static. She glanced around, searching for any sign of movement, but the field stood silent and still, save for the gentle sway of the cornstalks. Curiosity battled with fear inside her. Part of her wanted to turn and run to retreat to the safety of the farmhouse and pretend she hadn't heard anything. But another part, the part that had grown up exploring these fields, knowing every inch of them, refused to let her ignore it. Gathering her courage, she stepped into the cornfield, pushing aside the tall stalks as she ventured deeper into the labyrinth of green and gold. The further she went, the more pronounced the voices became. They weren't calling out to her, nor did they seem aware of her presence. Instead, they whispered among themselves, fragments of sentences floating through the air. "Don't look too late, they're watching." The words sent a chill racing down her spine. Each one was more unsettling than the last. She tried to focus, to piece together what they were saying, but the voices shifted and changed, slipping away like smoke before she could grasp their meaning. And then, abruptly, they stopped. The silence that followed was deafening, pressing down on her like a weight. Her breath caught in her throat as she scanned the area, her eyes straining to pierce the growing darkness. That's when she saw Ita's figure standing amidst the stalks, partially obscured by the shadows. It was humanoid in shape, but something about it was wrong. Its posture was unnaturally stiff, its head tilted at an angle that made her stomach churn. "Who's there?" she called out, her voice trembling. There was no response. The figure remained motionless, as if carved from stone. Emily took a cautious step forward, her pulse hammering in her ears. Just as she was about to call out again, the figure turned and vanished into the corn, not walking, not running, but vanishing as though it had never been there at all. Panic surged through her veins, and she stumbled backward, nearly tripping over her own feet in her haste to retreat. She didn't stop until she reached the edge of the field, gasping for air as she leaned against the fence. Her mind raced, trying to make sense of what she had just witnessed. Was it a prank? Some kind of elaborate hoax? Or was it something else entirely? When she finally mustered the strength to tell her family about the incident, they listened with a mixture of skepticism and unease. Her father, a grizzled man with hands calloused from years of labor, dismissed it as nothing more than her imagination playing tricks on her. "You've been working too hard," he said gruffly. "Get some rest and you'll feel better in the morning." But her younger brother, Jake, wasn't so quick to brush it off. He had always been the curious type, the one who loved hearing tales of the strange and unexplained. His eyes lit up as she recounted the story, and he insisted they investigate further the next evening. Armed with flashlights and a sense of determination, Emily and Jake ventured back into the cornfield. The atmosphere felt different this time, heavier, charged with an almost electric tension. The usual sounds of the countryside, the chirping of crickets, the rustle of leaves were absent, replaced by an oppressive silence. As they moved deeper into the field, the whispers returned, faint at first, but growing louder with each step. Jake gripped Emily's arm, his voice barely above a whisper. "Do you hear that?" She nodded, unable to speak. The voices were clearer now, more insistent, as if urging them forward. Against her better judgment, Emily led the way, following the sound deeper into the heart of the cornfield. What they found there defied explanation. In a small clearing surrounded by towering stalks, stood a circle of stones arranged in a crude pattern. The ground within the circle was scorched black, as though it had been burned, though there was no smell of smoke or ash. Etched into the largest stone was a single word, carved deeply into the surface. "Listen." Before either of them could react, the voices erupted into a cacophony of sound overwhelming and disorienting. Emily and Jake clutched each other, their flashlights flickering wildly as the world around them seemed to warp and twist. Shadows danced at the edges of their vision, fleeting glimpses of figures moving just beyond the light. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the noise ceased, leaving them alone once more. Shaken, but alive, they fled the field, vowing never to return. But the experience left its mark on them, lingering in their thoughts long after the initial shock had faded. The whispers followed them, faint echoes that crept into their dreams and haunted their waking hours. No matter how far they ran, the voices in the cornfield refused to let them go. Years passed, and the story of the mysterious voices spread throughout the community, whispered in hushed tones over kitchen tables and campfires. Some claimed to have seen strange lights hovering above the fields at night, while others reported hearing disembodied cries carried on the wind. The cornfield became a place of legend, avoided by most and feared by all. Yet, despite the warnings, people continued to venture into the field, drawn by morbid curiosity or a desire to uncover the truth. None ever returned unchanged, their faces pale and haunted, their eyes hollow with secrets they refused to share. The voices, it seemed, had a way of finding those who sought them out, pulling them into their web of mystery and madness. And so the legend lives on a chilling reminder of the unknown forces that lurk just beyond the edge of our understanding. The cornfield remains silent and watchful, waiting for its next visitor to heed the call of the voices within. The vanishing of hiker Jane. The sun was setting over Usede National Park, casting long shadows across the towering granite cliffs and painting the sky in hues of orange and pink. The air carried a crispness that signaled the approach of autumn, yet the warmth of the day still lingered in the valley below. It was late afternoon when Jane Carter, a 34-year-old avid hiker from Sacramento, decided to take one last detour on her favorite trail. Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from, and what time is it there? Jane had spent the entire day exploring the Tuolumne Meadows area, a place she'd visited countless times before. Her familiarity with the terrain made her feel at ease as she wandered further than usual, drawn by the promise of solitude and breathtaking views. She wore her trusty hiking boots, a weathered backpack slung over her shoulders, and carried only the essentials: water, snacks, a map, and her phone. Little did she know, this seemingly ordinary outing would become the subject of intense speculation and debate among enthusiasts of the missing 411 phenomenon. As she ventured deeper into the forest, the sounds of civilization faded away. The rustling leaves, the distant call of birds, and the gentle flow of streams created an almost meditative atmosphere. Jane paused occasionally to snap photos with her camera, capturing the beauty of the landscape around her. Time seemed to slip away unnoticed us. She became fully immersed in nature's splendor. It was around 5:30 p.m. when Jane reached a particularly scenic overlook near Cloud's Rest. The view stretched endlessly before her a panorama of jagged peaks, lush valleys, and shimmering lakes. As she stood there, taking it all in, something peculiar happened. Her phone began acting strangely. First, the signal disappeared entirely, despite being in an area where reception usually remained strong. Then, the battery drained rapidly, dropping from 70% to completely dead within minutes. Perplexed, but not overly concerned, Jane tucked her useless device back into her pack. Nightfall approached faster than expected. The temperature dropped sharply, and the once bright surroundings grew dimmer with each passing moment. Jane realized she needed to head back toward her campsite, located near Tenaya Lake. However, as she turned to retrace her steps, a wave of disorientation washed over her. The familiar landmarks she relied on were nowhere to be seen. Panic started creeping in us. She wandered aimlessly through the thickening darkness. Back at the campground, Jane's absence went unnoticed initially. Friends assumed she'd chosen to extend her hike, or perhaps decided to sleep under the stars somewhere along the trail. But as hours passed without any sign of her return, concern mounted. By morning, search parties were organized, consisting of park rangers, volunteers, and specially trained dogs. They combed through every inch of the area where Jane was last known to have been. Days turned into weeks. Despite extensive efforts, including aerial searches, ground teams, and even psychic mediums brought in by desperate family members, no trace of Jane Carter emerged. What made her case even more baffling was the complete lack of evidence suggesting foul play or accident. There were no signs of struggle, no abandoned belongings, nothing indicating distress. It was as if she had simply vanished into thin air. Word about Jane's disappearance spread quickly throughout the hiking community and beyond. People familiar with the missing 411 theory couldn't help but draw parallels between her case and others documented across North America. In these mysterious incidents, individuals, often children or young adults, inexplicably go missing in national parks and wilderness areas. Common threads include strange behavior prior to vanishing, equipment malfunctions, sudden changes in weather conditions, and unexplained electromagnetic anomalies. Meanwhile, Jane's loved ones struggled to come to terms with what had happened. Her younger brother, Michaela, software engineer living in San Francisco, threw himself into researching similar cases. He scoured online forums, interviewed fellow hikers who'd experienced unexplainable phenomena, and corresponded with authors specializing in paranormal investigations. Through his efforts, he uncovered disturbing patterns linking various disappearances geographically and temporally. Months later, another incident occurred just miles away from where Jane went missing. This time, it was a father and son camping near Merced River. During their evening meal, they claimed seeing lights dancing erratically above the treetops, lights resembling fireflies, but much larger and brighter. When they attempted to investigate further, both men reported feeling an overwhelming sense of dread, causing them to retreat hastily to their tent. Upon reviewing footage captured by their dashboard camera earlier that day, they noticed strange figures moving in the background of otherwise empty landscapes. These developments reignited interest in Jane's case. Investigators revisited old leads, analyzed new information, and expanded their search radius. Yet, despite growing public awareness and increased resources allocated towards solving such mysteries, answers remained elusive. Some theorized extraterrestrial involvement, pointing to alleged UFO sightings recorded near Ucede over decades. Others suggested dimensional portals might exist within certain geographic coordinates, explaining how people could enter yet never exit. For Michael Carter, however, speculation wasn't enough. He continued searching tirelessly for concrete clues regarding his sister's fate. Along the way, he encountered other families affected by similar tragedies. Together, they formed a support network sharing experiences, resources, and hopes for resolution. While skepticism abounded among mainstream media outlets and law enforcement agencies, these individuals found solace knowing they weren't alone in confronting questions science couldn't yet answer. Years passed. Seasons changed repeatedly over Usaid's majestic landscapes. And though official records listed Jane Carter as missing, presumed deceased, those closest to her held on to faith that someday, somehow, the truth would emerge. Until then, her story served as a haunting reminder of the vast unknowns lurking within our natural world. A testament to how easily we can lose ourselves amidst its grandeur, whether physically, spiritually, or perhaps in ways we're only beginning to comprehend.